However, there are lots of discussion in social media about this matter. People were comparing, Trump's special operation, which lasted only 3 hours, with Vladimir Putin's so-called special operation, war against Ukraine, which still will last more than 4 years, probably. What is your reaction to this? And do you feel that Vladimir Putin is feeling humiliated right now by this comparison? Because he couldn't do the same, right? He wouldn't be able to do the same.
I think that's a valid point to make. I think if we're going to go make comparisons, we sit here and, even though the Kremlin supporters, including some people who will come in and comment on our on your YouTube channel, will say, oh, Vladimir Putin never intended to take Kyiv. He never wanted to take Ukraine. The fact is, you know this as well as anyone else, that the Russian special forces went in there on night one to go into Hostomel, the airport. They were going to use Hostomel then as the staging post to get into Kyiv, into the center. They were going to capture and probably kill President Zelensky and his ministers. And we know that not only did they fail to capture or kill Zelensky and his ministers, with that famous shot, by the lights of their phones, making that rallying call, which is, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. They didn't even take Hostomel in the end, which was a very, very key battle, right, that Ukraine held out. And so, yes, I think to that extent, it's a little bit different capturing a single person. You just have Maduro, and there were leaks from inside the Venezuelan, either the military or inside the political establishment. The CIA got a lot of information on where exactly Maduro was. It was a much more difficult operation for the Russians to take effectively an entire city center to be able to get the government. But yeah, I think Putin's sitting there going, yeah. We failed 4 years ago, while the Americans pulled this off. But the other thing here is Vladimir Putin doesn't admit failure. I mean, he's never going to admit to it. And I think far from dwelling on the fact, is he frustrated about this? Is he upset about this? I think you have to realize he's not going to stop. Look, as I talked to you, 2 more people were murdered in the Kyiv region last night. There were 6 that were murdered in Kharkiv on Saturday, with more than 30 who were injured. The fact here is that Putin, partly because he didn't succeed in the first weeks of the invasion, he's not going to stop now, which is precisely where the discussions are right now amongst Ukraine, amongst Europe and the U.S. And it's partly why there's this reshuffle of Ukraine's government as well, because I think President Zelensky knows that this is going to go on for some time.
Let's also cover another difficult topic to discuss. What kind of message does the US send to the world, to the global community, by conducting such operation, right? And I would like to quote Gideon Rahman, the chief foreign affairs commentator for the Financial Times, quote, "So when China launches a special op to size the president of Taiwan, or Russia tries to do the same for Zelensky, what exactly do we say? You can't do that, it's illegal?" What is your reaction to this? And what kind of message does the US send to the world by conducting such operation in Venezuela?
Yeah, Gideon Rahman's a smart person, and I think he's absolutely on the mark here, is that what the Trump administration has done has said that international law does not matter. Right? International organizations do not matter. Regional organizations do not matter. The only thing matters is what we want to do. And they had no legal basis to carry this out. So if China was to go into Taiwan and say the president of Taiwan does not recognize one China, which is our law, and it is. Therefore, the president is breaking the law. We must try this president in Beijing or Shanghai, and they go in and kidnap that president. What's the U.S. going to say in response? Where's the U.S. comeback on this? If Vladimir Putin, who has tried to assassinate President Zelensky, who's tried to capture Zelensky, if he finally succeeded, in assassinating or kidnapping Zelensky, and said, well, this is because Zelensky was an enemy of Russia who had committed numerous violations, was supposedly a Nazi, had discriminated against Russian citizens, all the disinformation. What's the American response to that? In other words, this is a very dangerous precedent that the Americans have set, because it is part of the breaking of the post-1945 system of international order, as flawed as that system might be. Now, what I find interesting is that a lot of European leaders are not saying this as openly as I am right now. There are some European leaders, Giorgia Meloni, who have actually supported the operation. There are some whose criticism has been very, let's say, muted. I think the French President Emmanuel Macron comes to mind. And then Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, has just simply said, I need to find out more about this. I need all the facts. Like, it's not obvious what happened. And I think one of the reasons why you have this relatively muted response from Europe, including from the EU's foreign policy head, Tkiie, is because they don't want to upset Trump at this sensitive point over the discussions on Ukraine. If they come in and say, Mr. Trump, you've broken international law. This is really awful. You really should think about what you're doing. You should release Mr. Maduro. Then, they upset Trump possibly, where he says, okay, I'm going to pull out of the discussions with Ukraine. So that's why I think they're going to be very careful. I think the one exception to that is Spain. Spain actually joined a statement by several Latin American countries, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, which criticized this, as being an operation that had no merit, a very forthright statement. But I think Spain's the exception here, and that for the sake of Ukraine, European countries will be very careful how they deal with Venezuela going forward.
Let's also cover another interesting statement by Marco Rubio. Probably he has been saying lots of interesting things during the latest several days, media engagements and clashes with US reporters, anchors. So he said that President Trump doesn't play games, quote. When he says he's going to do something, he means it. Why, in your opinion, this does not also apply to Vladimir Putin? Because after Maduro's capture by US forces, President Zelensky also commented on this matter, quote, if it is possible to deal with dictators like that, then US knows what to do next.
He hasn't said that about Vladimir Putin, because Vladimir Putin is not in the Western Hemisphere, because Putin oversees the world's second largest army, even if it's an army that hasn't been able to conquer Ukraine, because Putin has nuclear weapons, because some people in the Trump administration see Russia as a trading partner, including the envoy who's been carrying out the negotiations, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. So there will be no discussion about the fact that despite Vladimir Putin, unlike Nicolas Maduro, actually being the subject of an international arrest warrant, this is the International Criminal Court warrant over the kidnapping of Ukrainian children. Despite that, you will not see American special forces going into Moscow. And you will not see the Trump administration calling for the detention of Vladimir Putin. And remember, the U.S. is not even a member of the International Criminal Court. Now, let's bring that back to what I think may be the danger back in Latin America. And I think it is a danger that will have effects if it went this far regarding Ukraine, because it'll be so destabilizing. I'm troubled by what's happening with Venezuela. But I don't think we're at the point, and I initially thought this was regime change. And by the way, I'll just remind everybody, the Maduro regime is a horrible, horrible regime. Let's just say that. But regime change has not worked out very well for the Americans in recent years. Think about Iraq. And I think over the weekend, after Donald Trump made that statement in that rather bizarre press conference where he did not look very well, after he said the U.S. will run Venezuela, I think his officials rethought this very quickly, and they now are talking about regime containment. That is, they are not looking to change the government. They are looking to make the new president acting president, I should say, Delcy Rodriguez, and the defense minister, General Pedrino, interior minister, Mr. Caballo, the foreign minister, they're going to try to get them to do what the U.S. wants. So this is regime coercion. You know, you do what we want or we might attack you again. There's a real risk here, however, that the U.S. might go farther, in part because there is a desire at this U.S. domination of the Western Hemisphere. What the national security strategy just a few weeks ago said was the Trump corollary, the Trump addition to the Monroe Doctrine, which is from 1823. And what Trump bizarrely called the Donroe Doctrine. And that is that any country in the Western Hemisphere that they don't like, or that they see an advantage in terms of trying to seize its resources or get a favorable economic deal for its resources, they could apply military as well as economic and political pressure. So Marco Rubio, as well as Donald Trump, have said that Cuba could be next. Trump has also threatened Colombia with the false claims that its president is involved in cocaine smuggling. He threatened Mexico over the weekend on more than one occasion. And he has even threatened Greenland. Greenland, technically not part of the Western Hemisphere in the same way Latin America is, but is part of Denmark, is part of a NATO ally. But Trump and his advisors, Trump said it, the U.S. needs Greenland to be effectively part of it. This combination of a desire to expand U.S. domination and Trump's unpredictable and chaotic behavior and the economic interest of Trump and his inner circle, this doesn't bode well. And if the United States expands this operation where it's going after Colombia, it's going after Mexico, it's going after Cuba, it's going to get so tied down, it's going to get so bogged down in these interventions that they may not be able to contribute to the defense of Ukraine, even if they wanted to.